Welcome to the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism, hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Jonathan Yaris. This week's special guest, Stephen Goldstein.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Alan Steinberg hosted podcast, the voice of dynamic political centrism. I am here for another week of massive events happening out there, and not all of them are beneficial. But I always start the show with a custom. As Howard Cosell, who was my favorite journalist, used to say on Monday Night Football, as is our custom. Well, my custom is to list the objectives of this podcast. They are three. The idea is for a civil process to find a way to focus on a centrist solution. And that involves basically three components. First of all, the search for common ground. Secondly, the willingness to compromise. And thirdly, the objective of finding consensus. And if one is able to accomplish those three goals, one will have a lot of solutions that are not just policy effective, but also politically effective in this time. That is what makes our guest tonight a great honor for both my producer, Dr. Jonathan Yaris, and me, the presence of Stephen Goldstein, who really is a giant of New Jersey politics. He may not be a giant in terms of his height, but he is a giant in terms of his stature. That's the truth. Now, I have been a friend of Stephen's for almost a decade, and the fact that actually a little longer.
Longer, Alan, longer.
I know, but I'm going to turn 75 B'ezrat Hashem next week. So,
Mazel tov.
You know, and I'm celebrating at a restaurant in Brooklyn, a very good kosher Italian restaurant. So I do find a way of making events. But in any event, when I first met Stephen, he was a very prominent Democrat, and I was still prominent in the Republican Party. This is before Donald Trump came on the scene. That led to my eventually leaving the Republican Party for the Democratic Party, although I'm not tremendously happy with the far left progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I know Stephen isn't either, and he'll talk about that on the show. But one day he sent me a very complimentary note about how he and I were really both trying to advance the interest of the Jewish community. And if you grow up as a very motivated Jew, the same as Dr. Jonathan Yaris, my producer, is, you're always motivated to try to find solutions that the Jew faces in terms of confronting the public square. And that is something that Stephen Goldstein has done most admirably. He is a person who has really all his life endeavored to further civil rights, whether the civil rights of Jews, whether the civil rights of members of the LGBTQ community, whether it is a way of finding consensus between the parties to find solutions. He has been a fighter for a free society, for freedom in all spheres, and a responsible freedom. So I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have Stephen Goldstein on our show tonight. Stephen, thank you for being here.
Alan, you're a dear friend and a role model to me for your fairness and your heroism, and I'm excited to be here. I'll do anything for you.
Thank you, my dear friend. And of course, I didn't know this until I talked about getting you for the show with my expert producer, a doctor of education, Dr. Jonathan Yaris. I didn't know that you folks were friends also. So, as we say in French, Baruch Hashem. I mean, you know,
exactly.
we've got a trio of followers here, and that is a very good thing. Okay, I want to start the show tonight with the theme, the assault on academic freedom, both by Donald Trump and on our college campuses right now due to anti-Semitism. And I'm going to start with the latter, the assault on academic freedom on our college campuses first, because I know for Stephen, I know for Yoni, and I know for me, it's a painful subject. You can't really approach him as in an abstract way. Now, I'm going to start off by telling, the show is not about me, but this is a story I have in terms of how important academic freedom is to me. I went to Northwestern, Okay. And I'm grateful to my parents to this day, for making it possible to go there, where they had one of the best history curricula in the whole country. Now, when I was there, I took a course on the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I took this course from a professor named Ibrahim Abulagad. He was one of the two top Palestinian academics in the country. The other was someone from your alma mater being Columbia, Edward Said. And Edward Said was a very close friend of Abulagad. Now, I took the course. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was very fair. And as a result of taking the course, it did not increase my political sympathy for the Palestinians, but it increased my knowledge as to what their concerns were and why they felt the way they did, which I think is important in understanding any foreign policy conflict. But under today's standards, for example, when in a lot of academic arenas where people are trying to lessen the temperature, and in case of Donald Trump, eliminate what he calls Marxist content in our universities, a course like the one I took, I feel, is being threatened. And that course actually helped me my whole life as a Zionist advocate, because I was able to counter arguments on the other side. Stephen, what is your feeling on that? I've never asked you this, but I should have a long time ago.
Well, first, let me say this as regards to Rutgers. I think one of those profoundly disappointed in President Holloway's tenure. He came to Rutgers with the most extraordinary qualifications. He got rave reviews as somebody who would bring people together. He has utterly failed to protect Jewish students, and his willingness to negotiate with students who aid and abet terrorism is appalling to me. I just want to make that clear. That's a very different issue from attempts by the far right to destabilize the accreditation process. And my fear, if we politicize the accreditation process, is what's good for the geese is good for the gander. We destabilize this, universities will become a political football where one day we could have an accreditation board that's far right, opposing authoritarian values we don't want. And the next day we could have a ultra far left accreditation process that goes the other direction. That's a threat to Jews because of the wacko left right now. So I personally believe in accreditation, and I want it strengthened so that it remains either totally free of politics or respects political diversity. So I view the accreditation process as very, very different from my very hardline position in wanting to protect Jews on campus. And that's where I stand. And I think President Holloway has been an utter misery in his tenure. And I also believe that the answer to the far left threats on campus is not to weaken accreditation.
I could not agree with you more, and I have not heard from any authority since the Trump plan came out regarding elimination of accreditation unless they meet his standards. I have not heard a more comprehensive answer or an accurate answer than the one you just gave. Now, I want to call in for a minute. You know Dr. Yares, Jonathan Yares. He is a Rutgers graduate, and he's talked often with me about the Rutgers situation and the importance of the search for a new president. Yoni, why don't you give us a viewpoint on that? I think it would be helpful to both Stephen and myself.
So I've actually taken part in the accreditation process. To take a step backwards, as a student on Rutgers, I was one of the student leaders who was involved in their accreditation in 2008 or 9, because you get reaccredited every 10-ish years or so. And it is a very in-depth process, and I agree with Stephen that you can't cheapen it. There is a lot to it. It should never be on the whims of politics. It really is about a standard and a code of conduct in a way for education. Getting back to Rutgers, they are faced at a precipice of having to make a very challenging pick of who they want to lead the institution. You're talking about a president of a university the size of Rutgers. You have the fundraising arm, the academic arm, and the student experience, making up what they're responsible for. Right now, with what Holloway has done, he has risked the fundraising arm. He has created a toxic campus and created uncertainty on the academic side, therefore destabilizing what was a university that was really going in the right direction for a long time, being in the Big Ten, being finally getting the national recognition that it long since deserved. But when I hear from students on campus that to have students blocking a building prior to finals testing is not okay. That is not free speech. That is getting in the way. At campuses, you two probably are well aware, there are free speech zones that are protected areas for students to be able to express their needs and their concerns. And they're intentionally put up. They are still very public, but they're set aside from the academic area because they should never be an interruption. And I don't know who's out there because I'm not sure who in their right mind wants to be a university president in 2024.
I got a good candidate, Stephen Goldstein.
Okay.
No, I'm serious.
I
I'll tell you why I say that.
I was chancellor of the Rutgers Newark campus. Associate chancellor, it's a really hard job. I think being any college head these days, don't you think it's the hardest job in the whole? It wouldn't be hard for me. I would crack down very easily. I confess to you both. Can I say this?
You say whatever you want. It's your show.
Here's what makes life so difficult right now. In 1 week, and I want to tell you, as this came up on my iPhone just now in a news alert. In 1 week, we had the appointments of Rubio and Huckabee to Secretary of State and Ambassador Israel. I applaud both, by the way. I do. It doesn't matter whether I disagree with them on domestic issues. Right now, as a Jew who cares about the safety and security of Israel and thinks that the State Department has been an historic anti-Semitic cesspool and who admires Mike Huckabee for standing by Israel, whatever his religious reasons are, I applaud both. Okay. Then came Matt Gaetz, RFK Jr., the RFK Jr. appointments, a mockery of human decency, totally nuts. Listen to this whiplash. And then Trump came out with a statement saying that he wants to crack down on anti-Semitism on college campuses, which I agree with. There is no solid footing for those of us who are centrist, ranging, when I say centrist, meaning sensible center-left to centrist to sensible center-right, who care deeply about Israel, who believe the United States should support NATO and its allies, who just want moderation. We're in whiplash. This is hell. This is hell. We go from 1 hour to another, praising what we like, in torture for what is awful. I don't know about you, Alan and Yoni. It's like I don't even know what my identity is anymore. This is the worst thing in the entire world. And we live in a society where we can't win in the poison of social media. We can't win. Moderates, centrists, people in the vast mainstream of America can't win. Because we're not judged by what we stand for. We're judged by our not being extremists. Mm-hmm. It's a grotesque time for rationality right now. It's horrible. So I'm going to issue a tweet after this saying I agree with Trump on cracking down on anti-Semitism on college campuses that threatens students' lives. 5 minutes before the show started, I tweeted out that opposing RFK, Matt Gaetz, and some of the other appointments who I think are wacko. And before that, I praised Trump. It's impossible to know who one is in this poisonous extremist environment. I know who we are, but it's impossible to have any consistency when our president-elect is nuts and he himself is inconsistent. We're on the worst roller coaster ride of our lives. It's chaos already.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to focus a little on some of these picks in the Jewish community and also about Joe Biden, who I think got a very bad rap. He was a true friend of the Jewish community, and he demonstrated that actually in the war. But I'll get back to that in a minute. But what you have just said is the total confusion and chaos that reigns right now. And people don't know how to deal with it. I would say that there's one aspect of academia right now that concerns me a great deal, And that is the effort to denude the whole academic curriculum of history. Now, I am a history obsessive person. If you come into my apartment, it's wall to wall history on all sides. I have a lot. When I went to Northwestern, I took courses taught by revisionist historians. I took courses taught by political conservatives. I took courses of a wide variety, and that helped me develop intellectualism, so to speak, and a deeper knowledge of history. But what is going on now is an effort to eliminate works of history by the far right on the grounds that history somehow doesn't meet with their standards and that it is Marxist. I wanted to show you a book that, Yoni, can we see this?
The virtual background is getting in the way. There we go.
Okay, yeah, this is a very good book, Erasing History. Now, Stephen, you may actually, I have a feeling you know the authors. This book is written by Jason Stanley. He is part of a duo at Yale. He and Timothy Snyder have become my two favorite historians. Actually, Jason is a doctor of philosophy, and Timothy Snyder is on the history faculty. And they combine to talk about the search for meaning. But the book Erasing History is really an outstanding book, but it's disturbing because it describes the effort to just eliminate the free thinking of history and the free teaching of history. Now, this is something I think you relate to because you've been involved in a number of academic ventures. You were at the Anne Frank Institute. You were at a number, right now you're with the JCRC up in New Haven.
Uh-huh.
You've been involved all over the place. How do you regard, I know how you regard, but what do you think can be done to combat the effort to eliminate history from curriculum at all levels, not just universities, but at lower levels as well?
Here's why we have to counter that, Alan and Yoni. I've never seen an emergency of knowledge caused so much by an ignorance of history. Young people today, and I sound like what we in Yiddish would say, alter kaker, which basically means old fart. When I use
I use that word for me all the time.
Yeah, when I say young people today, they have no sense that life existed before themselves.
Correct.
It's unbelievable, right? So, in my own Jewish community, there are young Jews who don't know that any prime minister existed before Bibi Netanyahu. And so therefore they equate Zionism with all his policies. I say parenthetically, I'm a passionate Zionist. My problems with Bibi Netanyahu come from not from the left, but from the right, from a security standpoint. And I think he screwed up October 7th. So I have real problems with him from
I concur.
Right. Yeah. So I don't come at it from a lefty standpoint. Whether one likes him or not, they view Israel as this great big oppressor, and they have no knowledge of 3,500 years of Jewish history in which we Jews were oppressed, murdered in genocides constantly, well before the Holocaust. We've lost tens of millions of people throughout history. And they don't know that that existed because we were exiled from Israel. And they think they know more than 3,500 years of history. They think that if Israel doesn't exist, it would all be sweetness and light for Jews because they don't know history. They don't care about history.
I concur, sadly.
If anything, I want to see history increased. I would love to see history increased. And, I went to grad school at the Kennedy School of Government, and the most influential course of my life was taught by professors named Richard Neustadt and
the top of the line.
Yeah, and Ernie May. And Richard Neustadt was
another top of the line.
Yeah, Richard Neustadt was my advisor. May he rest in peace. And what was so great about that was he taught history, but he taught how to manage crises in life through history. He was proudly Jewish. He was a proud Zionist, but most of his prism was domestic U.S. politics. That course something like it needs to be required. Listen, I don't mean to sound draconian. for young people who have no intellectual curiosity, the purpose of education is to give them some, and understanding history will give them some. So I think that the denigration and underteaching of history might well be the greatest emergency in academia today.
Well, I want to tell you something else. I am so impressed that Neustadt was your faculty advisor. I will tell you somebody else who served as who served as a person advised by Neustadt academically when he was at Columbia. That person was Jim Florio. Now,
Wow.
my friendship with Jim Florio was really something. I had been not opposed personally to him, but when I was an active Republican, I was on the legislative staff. I was often at odds with his people, but it was a civil type of disagreement. But I liked Florio, but I really I'll use the word, I came to adore the man after I had retired from government. But because I did an article, I'll tell you an experience I had with him. One day I invited him to come to my office when I was at Region 2 EPA. And he came down, he was supposed to stay a half hour. I made him stay an hour and a half because it was like sitting there with an environmental encyclopedia. And I just loved every moment of it. I felt like a young student, earning my undergraduate curriculum in the environment. And that led to a series of lunch meetings that I would have with him or breakfast meetings. And especially after I left EPA, it was a dear, dear friendship. His passing was of tremendous sadness to me. His secretary used to tell me, Jim was the name partner in a law firm, and he was a terrific lawyer. But she said, he really likes getting together with you to talk politics. And he would leave his office. It was just a joy. We had to kick each other out of the meetings in order to end it.
You
But he
know,
was influenced by Neustadt very heavily.
I got to tell you something about Jim Florio. So I was John Corzine's co-campaign manager. And listen, I was much more partisan than a Democrat, and I thought this was in 2000. I thought if Jim Florio were somehow the Democratic nominee for Senate, that we would lose that Senate seat. I think we would have lost that Senate seat because he had come across, rightly or wrongly, he was very unpopular in New Jersey. He would not have won a general election, especially against Bob Franks, who was a moderate
I
Republican,
understand. Yes.
in my view. But John Corzine didn't always want to do debates, so he put me as the campaign manager up against Jim Florio. And a couple of times, there was the weirdest thing. It would be Jim Florio and me as John Corzine stand-in. And here's what I thought about Jim Florio. He's the most underrated policy intellect that I ever encountered in my life.
Absolutely.
He had a grasp, not just of environmental stuff. He had a grasp of public policy that was unrivaled. I actually think Hillary Clinton, whatever one likes her or not, and I'm a fan of hers, also had a similar grasp of public policy. Real students of public policy who know it to a granular level. So impressive. And my story about Jim Florio is this: he and his staff, in the heat of a campaign, it would ask me a question, and they said, we know why you're running Corzine's campaign. It wasn't because of the money. It was actually because I was a partisan Democrat then and wanted to keep the Senate seat. Because you think Corzine has a better chance than Florio. Okay, let's stipulate that. The Florio people, and Florio would say that. Do you really think that John Corzine would be a better U.S. Senator than Jim Florio would be? And I like John Corzine a lot, but I couldn't answer that question honestly. I would just be silent. Because Jim thought Florio was one of the most thoughtful, brilliant people. Brilliant. I mean, brilliant. Like a real creative, original thinker. And not just grasp of knowledge. He had solutions to things. You might not agree with them, by the way. What I'm saying is, we might not agree with them. But to listen to him was majestic. It was ear candy.
He was much more pragmatic, by the way, than people thought.
Very
Because
pragmatic.
I would discuss like he was the architect of the Pinelands Environmental Protection Plan, and he also was the creator of Superfund. I found of all the programs I work with at EPA, I just love Superfund because it gave me the power to really implement closure solutions, go after parties who were responsible, hold them accountable. And every time I would meet Jim, I got to be a pain in the neck on this. I would never stop thanking him for Superfund. That was a Jim Floyd. That was, in my view, because of that, and I'll run into resistance here. In my view, because of that, I rank Jim Florio as the number one member of the House of Representatives to ever represent New Jersey, because I think that the Superfund program had that monumental effect on the American environment. I mean,
It did, Alan.
people will disagree, but that's my feeling.
It did. And by the way, two of the greatest environmentalists of our time were Republicans, Teddy Roosevelt and you. So
Well, I'm complimented.
so I it's too bad that Republican Party is gone.
Yep.
Well, that's why I didn't leave the Republican Party. It left me the moment Donald Trump came down that escalator.
You know, I have to tell you something. I After this election, I said to myself, will this be the last Democratic vote I ever cast for president? And I voted for Kamala, mostly because I think Trump is a psychopathic derangement of danger to American democracy. I don't know that I would have voted for the Democrat had it been a Romney or a McCain type who was or a first George Bush, who I thought was, in retrospect, was the most underrated president, the first George Bush.
Especially on foreign policy.
The first George Bush, I thought, was probably the best foreign. I can make a case that the first George Bush was the most effective foreign policy president, maybe ever. Really?
I agree. I agree.
And it took me time to see that. The first George Bush knew how to use American power, and he knew the limits of American power, and he knew how to balance it magnificently. And I said, would this be my last Democratic vote? Because it's not going to be Trump. And I said to myself, all it's going to take is one nutty thing like an Omar or Rashida Tlaib to somehow rise in House leadership. Either if something like that happened, I would go right to the Board of Elections and become a registered independent. Wouldn't become but I would drop this party identification I've had my whole life.
I understand.
And then we have Matt, not just Matt Gaetz and RFK. I grew up, Alan, maybe you'll relate to this. I'm an internationalist. I believe in American exceptionalism. I believe in the great foreign policy bipartisan agreement that America should make a difference in the world. I'm not an isolationist. I never thought I would see an America where the Republicans would be weak on Russia. This is the most uncanny thing in the whole world, the opposite of what we grew up with. The Republicans were the strong for America foreign policy, and the Democrats were accused of the opposite, and now it's inverted. And so then we have Tulsi Gabbard, who I think is an insane pick to lead national intelligence. I do. And so it probably won't be my last Democratic vote, because if their nominee is J.D. Vance and the Democrats choose Josh Shapiro, who I'm going to support, who should have been vice president.
We concur on that.
But by the way, listen, Kamala lost the election so badly that maybe Josh Shapiro would have won Pennsylvania, but he would not have won the election.
I feel the same way. I was less upset at him not being picked as a result of the way the election turned out. I mean, she lost all 7 swing states. And by the way, I think she was a good candidate. I dispute that. I think she made one mistake. And, and that was on, I am very much for the rights of transgenders, very much against discrimination. But it's a complicated issue in terms of them competing with women.
I get it. I get it. To me,
but I just want to make one point on that.
Yeah.
Even Martina Navratilova wrote in opposition, but I don't want to discuss that at length on this show.
Yeah. I get it.
I think that was the one mistake that she made, tactically speaking, regardless of what one feels about it, because Trump made a very effective point when he made the statement that, she's with the others. They tried to portray her as somehow out of the mainstream, and they could have countered that ad.
Yeah, I think Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party's biggest mistake has been its treatment and view of the Latino and Latina community. And we started losing as a party Latino votes, and that was a forerunner of how disastrously we did among people of color. And guess what? Even people of color suffer through inflation, and even people of color want a secure border. And our party just didn't speak to them. It didn't speak to them. Now, this will come as a shock. I've never said this. My view on immigration is this: I both want more leniency for dreamers and legal immigrants, but I do want secure borders that are tougher. Like, I'm willing to make a trade-off between secure immigrants and dreamers who've been here their whole lives. I don't want to.
Absolutely.
These are really good people. They themselves would favor stronger immigration borders. So listen, I did oppose the wall, frankly, that Trump built. But if there was some grand deal where legal immigration and dreamers were protected in exchange for the wall, this would come as a shock. I've never said this. Would I accept a wall if there were more compassionate views for legal immigrants and dreamers? I probably would make that deal. I've
But
never said that. I
well,
probably would make that deal.
I agree, but let me mention one thing about the difference I feel between African American voters and quote unquote Hispanics. African American is an ethnic group. An African American person cannot escape his ethnicity. He's going to be subject to discrimination because of it, because that's his or her color. So, therefore, if you look at the election, Kamala had almost exactly the same percentage of the African American vote as Biden did in 2020. She really lost nothing off that vote. And they responded very well. The idea that there was going to be this defection of African American males never took place. The quote unquote Hispanic vote is different in this respect. I don't feel Hispanic refers to an ethnic group. Hispanic refers to a common language. I spent a lot of time at EPA down in Puerto Rico. The difference in terms of ethnic values and beliefs between Puerto Ricans who are in New Jersey and Cubans who are in New Jersey is as different as night and day.
100% right.
They don't identify. And the other factor, and I'm saying this in a positive way, not in a negative way, actually, neither positive nor negative, in an objective way, is you have members of different color within each of these quote unquote Hispanic ethnic groups. You have members of the Puerto Rican community who basically are white, and as they advance, they think of themselves as white, which is a luxury that the African American doesn't have. And as they think of themselves more white, they relate less to a lot of the discrimination and economic deprivation that people within these ethnic communities have. So I think that they have to be addressed differently. That's just my perception.
I also
Yeah.
think, to hop in here for a second on 2 points, when it comes to my research area is a lot in this, is that the Hispanic community makes up such a vast swath of people that we've really bucketed them together. You're talking about multi different regions of the world. And two, when you had the far left nuts progressives using terms like that, there are terminology. Like, it's all joke about the Nova car. It wouldn't sell in Mexico because it means no go. But that same language was coming up for them, and they had the trauma of what it looked like there, and that trauma was real for them. And the Republicans had a very good job messaging it. The Democrats need to fire their messaging team.
Well, no, I concur with that. But I agree with Stephen that the messaging was not really refined, so to speak. But I want to ask Stephen something, and then I'll get into the Trump appointees thus far. And let me make a statement as to how I view Israel in the context, and Stephen knows my feelings on Israel. Israel is a passion for me. Support of Israel is an essential outgrowth of Zionism. I think Theodore Herzl was one of the most profound intellectuals and positive influences on nationalism of the last 300 years. However, while I'm very pro Israel, I am also, Israel is my people, it is not my country. And if there is a very good candidate, I shouldn't say good, if there's a very pro-Israel candidate who is a disaster on America, which is exactly what Donald Trump was, I'm not going to endorse him. I'm not going to vote for him as long as the other candidate is more or less positive on Israel, which was Joe Biden, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. But I will not endorse a candidate. I will not vote for a candidate who may be very good on Israel, but is terrible for America. I owe America everything. My grandparents came to this country. They succeeded in our society. I was able, the night I was sworn in as Region 2 EPA administrator, I gave a speech and I talked about my bully. And she was from Lithuania and she was in steerage on the ship. And she gave me once a book that she studied for an American citizenship test. And I said she would never believe that years later her grandson would be sworn into a presidential appointment about 300 yards away from Ellis Island where she came in. So my duty to America is my profound, my deepest responsibility. And I don't say that in any way to lessen my support of Israel, but I could not support Donald Trump because he was a catastrophe for the country.
So let me say this. I almost believe that. I mostly believe that. And it's this. After October 7th, listen, I don't like you and Yoni. I'm a Zionist to my core. It's inseparable from Judaism. I don't use the word hate that often, but let's just say I despise anti-Zionist far-left Jews. I don't get them. I think they're a grave danger. But after October 7th, when I felt that 7 million Jews in Israel were in danger, could I have voted for a candidate like Nikki Haley, with whom I disagree on everything under the sun but Israel? Yeah, I could. There's a difference between my disagreeing with a candidate and my thinking a candidate is a mortal danger to America. Nikki Haley, whom I agree with on almost nothing, except on Israel, and she was very good on the flag issue in South Carolina, where she showed bravery on the Confederate flag. I disagreed with her. She might have had my vote. She would not have been a mortal danger to America. So after October 7th, I could swallow everything I believe in if I agreed with the candidate on Israel, except I thought that Donald Trump was a mortal danger to America, and it came down to me for this. I thought Israel could fare better under Kamala Harris than America could fare under Donald Trump.
I concur 100%. I have the exact same view.
And here's what I thought about Kamala Harris, and here's what I think about Joe Biden. Joe Biden was mostly really good on Israel. And yes, occasionally pissed me off with red meat rhetoric that he would occasionally give people who are anti-Israel on the Palestinian side. He gave the rhetoric from time to time, but on policy, when push came to shove, he was there for us.
He
So
never once issued any sanctions against Israel, and he gave them every piece of equipment they asked for.
exactly. Now, do I think he ran some language up the flagpole when he felt some political pressure? I do. Did I agree with some of his occasional anti-Israel language? I did not. He never backed it up with policy. I mean, he was great on policy. I think Kamala Harris would have been basically the same. She would have continued Biden's policy. I think she would have pissed me off as president from time to time with rhetoric that I wouldn't have agreed with. But I think on policy, she would have been there. And we would have had a rational human being to lobby. We don't have a rational human being in Donald Trump.
100%.
And so I thought Donald Trump was a bigger threat to America than I think Kamala Harris was to Israel. And that's been borne out this week. For me, RFK Jr., if he is confirmed as HHS secretary, we're one more pandemic away from a quarter of the country dying because he doesn't believe in mainstream science and vaccinations. That's a threat. That's a problem. And so Donald Trump doesn't even pass the laugh test. All I ask is that somebody pass the laugh test. I may disagree with you, but please be within the mainstream. Just be within the mainstream after October 7th. If you were for Israel, all I asked is that otherwise you be within the mainstream. And we didn't have a mainstream candidate. He's crazy. And I fear, by the way, I fear for journalists like you, Alan, frankly. Uh,
So
um,
do I.
you're a hero to me. And by the way, even when you were more avowedly a Republican, you were always so respectful and interesting, and you love the art of political debate and the exchange of ideas. You were never a know-nothing partisan.
Never. I,
Ever, 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 ever,
I,
ever.
I thank you so much for saying that. You don't know.
No, never, never, never. Even when I didn't disagree with you, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you. I'm proudly Jewish. I'm not Orthodox. You're an Orthodox Jew who, even when you were a Republican, would often go out on a limb and take some liberal positions on social issues. You were never an ideologue. You were a
Absolutely.
Republican, but you were a good old-fashioned Republican of old who was normal. Excuse me for saying that. I mean, I might not agree with you, but I knew
That's
what
one of the few areas of life where I was normal.
So this actually raises
But
an
I want to
interesting.
mention, so that I have a question I want to follow up
Yeah,
on
yeah,
that. Okay, you have Senate experience.
yeah, I did. Yeah,
Now, I'm going down the list of these appointees. I mean, I was happy with the pro-Israel picks of Rubio,
great,
Waltz. I was happy with
great.
those picks.
Me too. I was jubilant. I
I,
got that day, Alan. I got over temporarily Trump's defeat. Temporarily, I said to
but
myself.
then the next day came.
Then the
Okay,
next day came. I was crashing into depression.
I was going bonkers. Now, I'll go through the list very quickly. You had the situation with Matt Gaetz when they announced he was Attorney General. I thought it was satire. I thought it was like a Saturday Night Live, SNL live interruption of MSNBC, which I was watching. I couldn't believe it was for real.
Right.
Then you had the appointment of RFK Jr., anti-science, anti-vax. I said the same thing on a tweet that I issued today, and on this tweet, I said specifically that the same thing you just did, that his anti-science and anti-vax, if there's another pandemic, and I learned at EPA how inclined we are to have pandemics, we're in a situation where it would result in the destruction of millions of lives. Now, you've had other crazy appointments as well. You had the appointment of Hesketh. I always forget how to pronounce his name, who wants to eliminate the whole command and control structure of the military. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who says she's pro-Israel, but she's a threat to Israel because she will really hamper intelligence sharing. And she's also pro-Assad, and she's pro-Russia, which is a mortal enemy of Israel right now. So you have all these people now.
Her problem
I
is
have a
that, yeah,
question of you on this. So, okay, you're familiar with Senate procedure.
yeah,
My prediction is that Trump is going to try to get these people confirmed through recess
yeah,
appointments.
yeah.
And I've studied the law on recess appointments, and I see it as something that really is a possibility. If he gets a recess appointment, for example, of Gates, 2 years from now, he can get another recess appointment of Gates, as long as Gates is, as long as the Republicans still control the Senate. My question of you is, in what sense what do you think are the political obstacles to recess
Well,
appointments? Do you
first of
think he can
all,
get it?
here's the bottom line question. What do we think the final tally of the U.S. Senate is going to be? Is it 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats, or
It's
is it more?
53. It's going to be 53 if McCormick wins, and I think he will win.
I think McCormick has been declared the winner by many
By
publications.
some, not all, but I accept him. You accept him. It's
I accept him.
53 with him.
So okay, it's 53. Before we get to the recess appointment, I think that Lisa Murkowski would vote against Gates. I think, and I like her a lot. I think with Lisa Murkowski will come. I think Susan Collins, who is not as brave as Lisa Murkowski, would vote against Gates. That's 51. We need to lose. We need Gates to lose two more. I don't see two more I don't know that we're getting to a recess appointment. If it's 53-47 and the GOP loses two senators, it's still 51 votes. Who's going to desert the Republicans among the senators?
Well, I agree with you. If they get 51 votes, that'll be enough to confirm him. However, the reason I think this recess appointment option may take place is nobody is going to want to admit that they voted for the confirmation of RFK Jr., for the confirmation of Gates, for the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard, and this is a way out. You can, even though it's a phony way out, you can say that, well, it was a recess appointment. I never voted for one way or other. And you know how politics works. You know that senators would love to have that option. Although, I want to hear from you on that.
Listen, I think you're right, Alan, but here's what's changed. So I worked for Senator Frank Lautenberg, who's a great environmentalist, by the way, and
Well, I know. I worked very well with him.
I worked with Chuck Schumer in the House, and it used to be that there was one thing in Washington, D.C. that was more important than partisanship, and that was Congress's institutional prerogatives. And it used to be, no matter how partisan Congress was, if members of either party thought that the president was stepping on Congress and their own power, there was hell to pay for that. That doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't exist. Many of the new Republican senators believe, perhaps rightly, that they rode in on Trump's coattails. So there will be a recess appointment. It would have infuriated the Republican Party of old, even if their president was the incoming president, and nothing's going to happen. So when people tell me, I hear and I see it, oh my God, even Gates is too crazy for the Republicans. They're not going to confirm him. One, I think they're going to confirm him, but if they're not giving that option, they'll be happy to do a recess appointment. So I actually believe Matt Gaetz is going to be the next attorney general.
I do too.
And I believe, and RFK is going to get this. And they've mapped this out. And from what I don't know, Susie Wiles, but she seems to have some normalcy in her. I mean, she's straddling the MAGA world and the normalcy world fairly well.
But I think she's going to be more procedural than policy.
Yeah, no. Listen, Trump doesn't like a loss either. And he mapped all this out before announcing these people. It's mapped out. It's already mapped out.
I agree.
So I think people are totally crazy if they think these people are not going to be cabinet members. I mean, and I think the announcements were done cleverly with strategy. They announced some of the more popular picks first, and then they announced the crazy picks. And people like you and me, we do say we like his picks on Israel and the other. I think they knew what they were doing. We're looking at Matt Gaetz as AG, and we're looking at RFK. We're looking at her. It is it. It's done. Sorry to say. Listen, I could eat my words, but
no, I'm in full concurrence with you on this. I'm terrified, but I'm in full concurrence with you on.
I mean, don't we think that Trump's people spoke to both Thune and Cornyn and maybe Rick Scott when they were all in contention for majority leader and got their blessing? And I think, to use a Yiddish word, yeah, do what you want, give recess appointments. We don't need the source. All of them said that.
I think that's 100% accurate, which is why all this talk, a lot of times these network journalists want to hear their own voice. I have a theory about cable news, and this is a criticism I have, less of CNN than of MSNBC. Cable news network has become a cable news, not CNN so much again, but cable news in general has become a leading form of entertainment in this country. And that made it easier for Trump to play the role of the buffoon, because somehow people are watching. I did see where MSNBC's ratings went down, and Fox has gone way up. Fox is a tremendously effective and evil weapon of the far right. I mean, this is a company that in a Dominion case was found to have committed defamation
right
of the first kind, but they're very effective, and they had the money to absorb the suit. So TV news and your experience with journalism also very highly experienced plays a tremendous role. But I think the journalists I hear on TV all the time, oh, they may, this one may not make it. I think they're engaged in wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking. Wishful thinking. This has been planned for months. Remember, Trump began his transition for months. For months. This is all mapped out. He didn't just pick Matt Gaetz last week in his head. Months. It's awful. It's awful. And by the way, and whatever recess appointment somehow goes to the Supreme Court as a case that obviates the Senate's right to advise and consent, what this court's going to side with Trump. The court will decide with Trump.
100%. I don't have any doubt that that is the case. And right now, he has all three branches.
All three branches.
He is in total control of the legislative branch. He has a very compliant Supreme Court, and he is the ultimate unitary executive in terms of the federal executive branch, in terms of the presidency. I have a private concern, very, very much so, because of my involvement in EPA.
Right.
I think he's going to gut EPA. I have no faith at all in Lee Sheldon. The problem is this: Lee Sheldon is based in New York. You're going to see a lot of events, quote unquote, environmental events in this region. It happened when Christy Whitman was the national administrator of EPA. She was always having events in her own backyard, so to speak. Nothing wrong with that. But I think Zeldin is going to do the same thing, except his events are going to be events that play down the environment, and his events will build up business. And that is a very bad focus in my view. I'm visiting. I always go back to EPA for the parties they have there, and I build a very warm and intimate relationship with the staff there. And I feel obliged to give a little talk while I'm there that stand tough, stand by your job. I'm not going to have. I think we need a national resistance movement of people that will resist lawfully, but be willing to engage in civil disobedience. Otherwise,
the
I think
problem is,
Trump
how do we get sensible people who are liberals like us rather than the people on the ultra left who will resist, appear on television, and turn millions of people off?
I agree with you. That's the problem. I don't know who can spearhead effectively that movement.
I
It's
don't.
got to be done.
Listen, there are sensible Republicans. I just don't think they have power. I think Mitt Romney is a sensible Republican. I think Liz Cheney is to be admired beyond measure. Liz Cheney would have been fantastic in the cabinet in many positions. She's a brilliant woman. I just don't see who could lead it.
I agree 100%. I will say this, that there is a book by a historian at Vanderbilt, Nicole Hemmer, which really tells the story of how the Republican Party changed. It was not a racist party under Ronald Reagan. No one could make that claim. You could disagree with his policy, but no one could make that claim. The biggest influence in the Republican Party that put them with one theme, and that theme was white racial grievance. That has been the soul of the Republican Party throughout the Trump years. It is a racial grievance party, but the person who created that is someone that is forgotten, and that person was Pat Buchanan. And I saw his speech at the convention in 1992, and without exaggeration, I can tell you I was chilled.
Yeah. Listen,
and that was it.
I think we may still have different views on Reagan. Do I think he was a great leader? I do. Did I agree with much of what he did? No. But
I have civil disagreement on him too.
But he was a forceful communicator. I mean, Bill Clinton, and Obama, all of whom are very different, knew how to use the bully pulpit. And the Democrats need somebody like that, in 2028. Will they do it? I don't know.
Well, I see a number of names emerging. One of them is Josh Shapiro, who you and I talk about all the time. Another is Andy Bashir.
Right.
Andy Bashir is sort of the Democrat of middle America, and they may need to embrace that more. My preference will continue to be Josh Shapiro, but if it's Andy Bashir and he's out there already, I wouldn't be unhappy, so to speak.
You know what?
Yeah.
Right. He's fine. I like him. I mean, I like Josh Shapiro for all sorts of reasons. I wish the Democrats would unite and come up with Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro. It would be great to have a unified ticket of some kind. I know it'd be great. Whatever I think of Gavin Newsom, I don't think he's could win nationally. We can't go left. We cannot go left as a party. We cannot.
I agree.
I say this as a centrist liberal. I'm still not a conservative. I'm just a normal old time centrist liberal Democrat who's
The
not.
center left can win.
And,
Progressive left cannot
and
win.
I don't understand all of these lefties who think that if we go left, putting aside ideology, every Democrat in modern times since Roosevelt won as a center lefty. Lefties don't win for the Democratic
100%.
Party. Now, you can make an exception for Lyndon Johnson, but you know what? Listen, he was from Texas. He had a different kind of image, and he inherited the office under unusual circumstances. Basically, the Democrats don't win unless it's a center lefty. How many more losses do we want?
You know something about Lyndon Johnson, and I'll end with this. Every time I go to, I'm going to be 75, Emir Hashem, as we say in Yiddish. Every time I go to my doctor and I have Medicare covering me, I'm indebted to Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey. I think that and the Civil Rights Acts of 64, 65, and 68 were the apogee of Democrat Party achievement. And that happened due to the effectiveness of Lyndon Johnson. And I can never stop thanking them for that.
We started with
Stephen,
higher education. He did that too.
who's that?
Lyndon Johnson got the Higher Education Act passed as well.
I know that, but the things that touched most Americans, I feel, and I don't believe me, I'm a very strong advocate of higher education, but those three things had the most effect on society because Medicare, senior citizens would be starving had it not been for Medicare, and also I give the president I work for, George W. Bush, credit for the prescription drug program. Stephen, this has been an edifying evening.
Thank
It's
you.
been a magnificent evening.
Alan.
I'm going to beg you to come back. Okay.
Anytime you want. And when you run for president, I'll support you.
I won't even run for president of my shoal.
By the way, Alan, I think that's going to be a harder job than president of the United States.
It is. I got to tell you a funny quick story. When the first time I went to Israel was in 1966, a year before the Six-Day War. And in those days, you had something called aerograms. And aerograms were in those days, to call from Israel to the United States back and forth was $12 a minute. When my son was a student at Hebrew University, it was something like for 1 minute, it was 50 cents. You know, yeah. Times have changed. It was a lot easier. But he sent me an aerogram. I was then the Aleph Gadol. That was a B'nai B'rith youth. I was the Aleph Gadol of Northwest Pennsylvania Council, AZA. And the advisor for the group went into the store one day. My dad was working in a clothing store, and he was also a manufacturer's representative. And he said to my dad, the boys were very impressed with your son's leadership qualities. My dad sent me a letter saying, who knows, maybe someday you'll be a shoal president. And I can still remember the laughter I got out of that letter. But Stephen, you're one of the people I have most. I'm saying this without
Alan. You know, you're really one of my favorites, and I will say this, and I hope I utterly embarrass you in front of your audience. You're a forerunner of the thoughtful centrism, evidence-based decision making. It's not that you don't have values; you have a passion and yet an open mind. It doesn't exist in politics today, or very few people. It's so frustrating. And I loved, when I was a staff member and an advocate, I didn't demonize the other side. I listened to them, and I actually loved making deals to get things done. My favorite part of working in government, not my most painful part, was compromise. And I used to sit down with opponents, and we would horse trade for hours and come out and shake hands, and everybody would be happy. I could have done that with you. I could have done that with others. It doesn't exist today.
No,
Doesn't. It's so screwed up.
I
Our
couldn't agree with
country
you
is
more.
painfully screwed up right now. A country I love.
But Stephen, as long as we can discuss matters like this on this podcast
Yep.
and and get more and more people to listen, there's hope. I mean that. I'm not saying that immodestly.
All right.
And we will do that. But God bless you. Keep on going. You're a model for everybody in the New Jersey and national political circles.
I'm really grateful to you. You're a model, and I promise that Yoni and I will bail you out of jail when Trump comes after you.
Well, I'm going to need that maybe. That's the thing.
You
I
think
know a
you're
lawyer. By the way, this is funny. If you can laugh about this.
I'm not laughing. I'm here for you, by the way. Yeah.
I know that, but this is very serious. But I have a lawyer who's a top flight appellate lawyer who said to me that if you are arrested, he wasn't kidding. He said he's one of the top appellate lawyers in federal appeals in New Jersey. He said in his top drawer, he has a whole lot of petitions for a writ of habeas corpus. He said there's one that fits people like me perfectly. He said he'll have me out on the street in 15 minutes. So I hope that is the case.
Okay.
Stephen, once again, thanks so much.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to your wonderful producer, my friend Yoni, as well. Thank you both so much. He is the top
of the line in terms of producers and
the best.
Knowledge. He really is.
Thank you so much, and early Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, and God bless.
Thank you both.
This has been the latest showing of the latest episode of the podcast, Dynamic Political Centrism, and may we continue to be dynamic, effective politically, and solve matters in a centrist way. Good night, everybody.
Join us next time on November 27th for the next episode of Dynamic Political Centrism.